Hi folks, McNicol here, and today I want to talk about practice. It is an evergreen topic amongst musicians, of course, and it's something that I think most of us could probably do a little bit better, and that's what this video is all about. I'll talk you through 4 cornerstones that I've found really helpful when I'm thinking about practice. They are enjoyment, intention, your practice toolkit, and keeping the fire burning bright. And if you can combine all of those, then your practice should be very solid for many, many years to come. So starting out with that first one, enjoyment, super important. And I wanted to show you this. This is a signed picture of the legendary classical guitarist John Williams, and this is something that my dad got sorted for me back at the very beginning of my guitar playing journey. I would have been 6 or 7 years old, and he asked John to sign it and add a little bit of a motivational something to help keep me practicing. And John decided to write the following: William, I hope you are enjoying your practicing, enjoying being underlined there. And that has stayed with me. Any time spent with the guitar in your hands should be enjoyable time. There's no reason why it shouldn't be, and if it isn't, then something is wrong. So that's why it's such an important thing to get right when it comes to your practice. So how do you keep your practice enjoyable then? Well, I think it's important to manage your expectations and be kind to yourself. I mean, I've been playing guitar for about 28 years now, and I fully intend to be practicing for the rest of my life. It is a marathon and not a sprint. And if you're expecting things to come overnight and you're getting a little bit dejected by that, then that's obviously going to feed into your practice and it's not going to be so enjoyable. So keep those expectations managed. I also think it's important to keep a practice varied. You know, they say that variety is the spice of life, and I certainly think that variety is the spice of practice. So having a few things that you're working on to make sure you don't get, bored or the practice gets dull is really important. And that could be a few pieces that you could be working on, a few different techniques, a few exercises, anything that keeps the practice feeling like it's got a bit of variety in it is always going to be good, I think. I also think setting some manageable short, medium and long-term goals can be super effective. For example, a short-term goal could be something as simple as mastering a chord change within a piece that you're learning at the moment. A medium-term goal could be to try and collate a few of the pieces that you have into a set list that you could perform. And then a long-term goal could be some of your wish list pieces, tunes that maybe are out of your reach at the moment, but you are determined that you'll get there in a few years' time. And if you set those goals effectively and then they're manageable, it can feed into enjoyable practice, because when you reach them and you achieve them, you get that lovely kind of satisfying feeling of achieving your goals. And I think that's a really, really valuable thing. Next up, super important, keeping your practice healthy is really, really key to keeping it enjoyable, and that's both in terms of physical health and also mental health, I think. You've got to listen to your body, and if there's aches and pains, or if there's anything that you're doing which is creating tension, then that should be looked at, right? Because this, as I mentioned, is a long-term thing. You want to be practicing for as long as you possibly can be for your entire life. And if you're doing anything in your practice which is going to cause you to get any issues in your arms or your hands or your back, then you should really be aware of that. Make sure you warm up properly, take regular breaks, that kind of thing. But also from the mental side of things, I think that's important. And one of the key things to it, I think, is actually not to force it. If you're not feeling great, you're feeling a bit stressed, you've had a long day at work and you're a bit mentally fried, if you come to the end of the day and you think, oh man, I should really do some practice now, if you force it, then that negative energy that you had might feed into your practice and it could end up being quite frustrating. So instead of forcing yourself to practice in those situations, maybe just play. Just enjoy playing your guitar and don't worry too much about the practice. You can come back to that when you're feeling mentally able to do so. Moving on to that next cornerstone of good practice, and that is intention. I think it's really important because it's what separates playing from practice. If you just pick up your guitar and noodle away and play some tunes and just have a lot of fun, that's great. Really, really, really good thing to do, but it's not necessarily practice if it doesn't have intention behind it. And that intention, it's quite simple to get. All you need to do is use a sentence like, I want to get better at something. And that something could be a chord change, it could be a phrase in a piece of music, it could be a technique, it could be your ability to play with more musicality and expression. There's infinite iterations, of course, but it's just important to know what it is, because then when you sit down to do your practice, you know what you're aiming for, and that intention is so valuable to getting productivity out of your practice. So I just mentioned productivity there, and making sure that your practice is productive and you get good results out of it is obviously very important. And one of the big things you can use to help you with that is your practice toolkit. And this is anything that you can call upon to ensure that your practice is productive. And it will be different for everyone, of course, but I wanted to share with you a few of the things that have helped me and indeed students that I've worked with over the years. It could be using a timer, for example. And a timer can be very useful because it can make the most of small amounts of time. Because look, we are busy, life is busy, getting time with the guitar in your hands is tough enough as it is. So when you're in that kind of practice mentality, you want to make the most of it, then using a timer can really help with that. And it could be setting a timer for as short as something like 1 minute or even 2 minutes. And if you use that 1 minute or 2 minutes in a very specific way, for example, drilling into a really specific point within a piece, maybe it's a tricky little left hand movement or a tricky little right hand pattern, if you focus on that for 1 minute or 2 minutes and you use your timer to help you, it can be really, really effective. The nice thing about it is it has a finite end. You're not just going around for loops and loops and loops, just not knowing when to stop. Like, do you stop when you've got it good? Because that might take many weeks. But if you've got this 2 minutes set aside and you can keep on coming back to that, that can be really, really helpful. You could use a metronome in small doses. If it's used well, it can be really effective on working on rhythm. You could record yourself. I mean, it's so easy to record yourself now. All you need to do is just get your phone up and record a video and then watch it back, because that's a really nice way of removing yourself from the physics of playing, and you can just listen and watch, basically as your own audience member, I suppose. And you can look out for things like, does this look easy? Does it sound the way I was hoping it was going to sound? You know, does the dynamic variety that I was trying to put in here come across or not? And you can get good at this ability to self-critique. It's not about being overly harsh on yourself. I think we're always guilty of finding the bad things first and focusing on them, but always important as well to, recognize what's good as well. And recording yourself can be really valuable for that. Here's an interesting one. You can call upon your metaphorical magnifying glass, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's the ability to really zoom in to the music that you're practicing to understand what it is that actually needs practice. Because quite often, people think of practice as like playing the same thing over and over again. Sure, but it needs to be a bit deeper than that, I think. And you could play a piece all the way through like 5 times, and you haven't really practiced what needs to be practiced because you'll just gloss over it. So if you take a line of music that you've been practicing and you play that line a few times round, cool. But actually, it might not be the whole line. If you go deeper, get that magnifying glass out, zoom in, and find what the specific element that is tricky for you is, and practice that very specific thing. Because that, at the end of the day, just makes better use of your time. Another thing I really like doing is creating exercises from the pieces that I'm either learning or composing. It's a really useful thing to be able to do, like take something that you've been finding challenging within the piece and then develop a little exercise based around that challenge. It might be a technique that pops up. Perhaps the piece incorporates an element of, tremolo for your picking hand, and it might not be something that you've done a huge amount of. Obviously, there are exercises written specifically for tremolo, but you can also create exercises from the piece that you're learning. So extract the phrase that uses tremolo, analyze what's going on there in terms of the picking hand pattern, and then try it with some different chord shapes, different melodies. Mix it up a little bit. That keeps your practice varied. It gives your brain and your hands more opportunities to practice the technique, and it kind of gets you out of this kind of repetitive habit of just playing the same thing over and over again. And finally, getting feedback can be so valuable. You might have a teacher where you can discuss your practice in lessons, which can be great, but you might have friends who are also musicians who you could talk about your practice with, share recordings with them. You could be part of a community. For example, I have this thing called The College, which is my online learning platform and community for acoustic guitarists, and in our regular Zoom meets, we'll be discussing things that people have been practicing, things that have been going well, things that people have been struggling with, and we talk through them as a group, and that can be really valuable because so often the same people will be going through a similar issue, right? It's very rare to find something that someone else hasn't, already covered, and you can learn a lot from that, not just from a teacher, but from your peers. So yeah, sharing the journey, getting a bit of feedback can be really valuable as well in that toolkit. And the final cornerstone of good practice that I wanted to talk to you about is keeping the fire burning bright. And what I mean by that is the desire and inspiration that keeps you coming back to the guitar, to your practice, day in, day out, for years ahead. And look, we're all human, we'll go through peaks and troughs with this kind of thing, but there are certain things you can call upon to hopefully help keep that fire nice and bright. Some of the things that have helped me, and I know from talking to students that have helped them, are things like going to gigs, watching live music, watching the artists that inspired you in the first place. Coming away from a gig feeling inspired can be wonderful. And I've gone to many, many gigs where I've just watched them and thought, this is brilliant. The first thing I'm going to do when I get home is pick up the guitar and get into some playing and get into some practice. Listen to music as much as you can, because you might stumble across little ideas that you might want to bring into your practice. That can be really valuable. And another thing that I think can be really helpful is working towards tangible outcomes. So things like gigs. So you could kind of create a set of pieces that you've been learning and book in a gig, whether that be at an open mic or a folk club, or maybe even online as part of an online community that you might have joined where you want to share your work. Because that gives you something to aim for, and it keeps the desire there to get these pieces to a performable level where you've really mastered them. Another good thing could be recording. Plan a recording project. It could be an EP where you choose a set of the pieces that you've been working on and you try and aim for a recording, like get a recording session booked in at a studio. You've got that date in the diary to work towards then, and it really lights the fire in order to get those pieces up to a recordable level where you can record them, listen back to them and be really pleased with the results. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I think it's quite a common thread that I've heard from quite a number of people. And it's the journey that you have with a new piece of music. So it could be something like you hear a new tune for the first time and you think, wow, that's cool, I want to learn that. You might get the tab, you start learning it, it's quite exciting, you get all these new ideas under the fingers relatively quickly, and you can rush through that process of getting through the piece, and you can kind of get it to a certain level, right, where you can kind of just about play through it. There's maybe a few fluffs, a few stumbles, it's not perfect, but it's okay. And then you realise that actually, in order to reach that next level with it, that's an awful lot of time after that initial exciting kind of phase, right? And that kind of graph of improvement starts flattening out over time. I quite like using the analogy of climbing Mount Everest. You get to base camp, that's a lot of work, and that's that phase of getting a piece to where you can kind of just about get through the whole thing. But then to master it, to actually reach the summit of Everest, there's a lot more work that needs to go into that. And that's where people can start kind of getting distracted by other shiny new pieces to look at, and maybe the other ones that you put a bit of time into start getting neglected. And you end up with a load of pieces that are kind of okay. You can kind of get through them, but you haven't mastered them. But the desire to kind of get them to that next level where you really have mastered them over a longer period of time is not there so much. And it's quite satisfying to get there, I think. So having things like gigs or recordings or sharing your work as part of a community can help you lift those pieces to the next level. So there we go. Those are my 4 cornerstones of good practice. You've got enjoyment, you've got intention, your practice toolkit, and keeping the fire burning bright. And if you can combine all of those things, in the long run, I think you're going to get great results and you're going to have a lovely time making brilliant progress. I gave a little mention to my online learning platform and community called The College, and there's buckets of material in there about practice. There's lots of exercises, study pieces, there's the community aspect in there as well, which has all been designed to help with those cornerstones really. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link below in the description for you there. And finally, I just wanted to say that it would be lovely to hear from you in the comments below. Do you agree with what I've said about practice here? Have I missed anything? Are there any great practice techniques that have helped you? Throw them into the comments, it would be great to hear. That's it for now. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope above all that you enjoy your practice.